Well, that's a question that's often asked, how will I vote? I mean, if I'm being honest, today I would vote against independence, but my views are changing. I'm being quite honest with yourselves, because it's quite a stretch to go from being a unionist, as I am, to one where you might contemplate that seismic change. But the problem for me is, and that's what the book is about, is essentially saying, look, I believe that what Scots are being offered just now is in some respects a false perspective. On the one hand, you have independence, and of course Scotland can be independent. There's no dispute about that. That's beside us. But you have unionism. And I think it's tired. I think it's dated. I'm not sure what the union stands for. It was an amalgamation of nations when it first came up. So one of the things I argue in the book is I would like a second question on the ballot paper, which I think Alex Salmond, for a variety of reasons, would support, but the union at Westminster would not have it. And that would have been maximum devolution, which would have been far more powers for the Scottish Parliament, far more taxation powers, really stretching devolution to the limit. For a lot of Scots I speak to, don't want to leave the union, don't much like independence, and they wanted something different. They're not getting that now in the vote. And the problem is that the unionist parties are not, in my view, doing a lot to excite people about changing the union, making it more relevant for the 21st century. So that's the issue for me then. It may shift me from where I am to where I might be in the autumn of 2014.
Well, but you are here now because there is no second question, so that option's gone. I mean, you are now left with, well, the dismal divide as you've described it. So you will be forced to kind of go slightly further in one direction or another, won't you?
I thought you had changed since today's I was at work.
Listen, now that I've heard about your grandmother, I think I'm a squish,
well, be a bit more sympathetic since you've heard that. No, I mean, I accept that that's a question. And I'm being quite honest with the people I speak to, because my mind's on the move, I'm politically on the move. I'm not going to leave the Labour Party, God bless it, because I feel that it's still a massive vehicle for social change. However, in the Scottish context, I'm seriously, I suppose, challenged is the word. So between now and 2014, if the unionists, especially Labour, and I'm excluding the Conservatives without being disrespectful to anybody, but Labour has it in their hands to actually come up with an alternative which will keep a lot of Labour voters voting unionist. But I think if they fail to move, then they may stay and vote for independence. And of course, at this stage, I'm not sure what I will do.
Just on this thing about identity, you say as well in the book, unionist parties cannot grasp the most basic idea of modern political engagement, Scottishness. Now, I mean, what is the problem with this? Because I do recall the selection of, or the ruling out of Calton Hill as a possible venue for the Scottish Parliament. There was a lot of debate about whether or not Donald Dewar did describe it as a nationalist shibboleth. It is, as you'll know, Edinburghers, a hill covered with classical, Greek monuments, which, if anything, you would say were a unionist shibboleth. It's a testimony to the British love of classical form, and it's surrounded by streets with all sorts of, names from the Hanoverian period. Yeah. I mean, weird, Well,
weird, but I go back to, when devolution went through, 1997 we were elected, we were all kind of buoyant because we were elected, had a good white paper, approved, taken forward past the referendum. But I did, I think, 110 hours at the dispatch box taking the bill through the House of Commons. And the key opposition figure was Tam Dalyell. And I love Tam to bits. But every night I would, for about 10 hours a day, 2 days a week I'd be there and I'd look round for the opposition and Tam was just sitting on my shoulder. And Tam said at that point something which a lot of unionists, a lot of Labour MPs have never forgotten. If this goes through, it's the slippery slope. And one of the key problems about Westminster-based unionists is that they've taken that to heart. And what they see in themselves is they mustn't make a concession to nationalism. They mustn't make any concessions to Alex Salmond. And I've lectured them and hectored them and saying, look, if you're a Scot, why not be proud and passionate and patriotic? And why not want to be the Salter? But as you put it, Lesley, quite frankly, I have not a clue, other than to say that if you look at the history of the Labour Party, it's fiercely based as a centralised, authoritative, Westminster-based party. Even when Keir Hardie was talking about Home Rule maybe over 100 years ago, there was still this shibboleth that was around, it must be about the union and anything that will break the union. And you hear this voice often saying, oh, I'm concerned about the poor in Manchester as well as the poor in Glasgow. Hey, so am I. But that doesn't mean to say That, you know, we have to spend all our time discussing things within the union's context, and why can't Scotland have more powers and deal with its poverty in a way with maybe a more energetic political programme as a consequence? So that's a great question to which I have not had an answer yet from the unionist
Henry, that is your leader, Ed Miliband, that you're slightly ribbing there with his concerns about Manchester and so on. So that, I mean, again, that I don't think plays well in Scotland to keep hearing that. Is no feedback reaching? Why not?
Well, the interesting point about the recent, I mean, I have great respect for Ed Miliband. I mean, he started to work at the Treasury when he was a lot younger. But the point is, he's now got this one nation concept. But the problem is, in Scotland, there isn't a one nation concept unless you want to be a nationalist, and it's one nation in Scotland. So, no, there is a total disconnect between Westminster and the unionist parties. To be fair, the Lib Dems, even in Scotland, have got some constitutional committees. David Steele's been doing a lot of good work, and they, at the end of the day, are a federalist party. Although with Clegg and company, you might not notice that. But the two major unionist parties at Westminster are simply, in one hand, afraid, secondly, fail to understand because it suits them, and thirdly, have not yet grasped the fact that at the end of the day, what happens at Westminster could alienate enough Scots to make that vote in 2014 much closer than it actually will be.
Mm-hmm. Is there no possibility, I mean, one thing that puzzles me is, you know, I'm kind of fairly preoccupied with matters Nordic, but I mean, there is a social democratic tradition across Northern Europe of which Labour could be part, which in the last 100 years mostly was quite supportive, if not leading, independence movements. But there's no trace of that. And it's as if all normal politics now must be suspended with ludicrously artificial divides between people who actually are so close politically, you know, between Alex Neil and Nicola Sturgeon on the left of the SNP, for example. It seems bizarre for us as Scots. We're not served well by having a division politically between people like this and folk on the left of Labour.
Well, you know, part of that attitude is reflected in the current debate with Cameron and company about the future of Europe and our role in it. You know, that if it's about Europe, it's something to dismiss. You know, it's a kind of, well, it's over the sea and we can't be bothered. But to me, I believe even the SNP don't, you know, make an issue of the Scandinavians in terms of their great welfare policies, certainly high taxation, productive economy, very civilised societies. I mean, we saw that when we went to Finland. You know, there's no kind of cage the beasts on the front page of the Finnish tabloids. So again, we've just failed to appreciate, and when people ask me the question, you know, I often say, well, look, ask me the question, do you want to be like England or do you want to be like Norway, Sweden or Denmark? I say it's a no-brainer. I'd rather be like the Scandinavian countries. There is a great model for Scotland there, different culture, you can't transfer a model. But again, at Westminster, there's little interest in projecting that. But I feel that as we approach 2014, part of the issue about getting the public involved in that, it's not so much about whether it's independence or unionism, it's what kind of Scotland do we want. And to me, there are lots of examples, many analogies that we can use, and Scandinavia strikes me as one of the best. But the other issue about Europe is, if you look at all the academic work on what they call subnational government, well, we'll just call it devolution, it's very advanced. But when we had devolution in '99, it was as if a miracle had happened. But other countries in Europe have had it for decades and decades and decades, you know, minority governments, etc. But we are poor learners in the United Kingdom. We're poor learners in Scotland. As a consequence, the debate will not be, to me, as inspirational as it should be, unless we start to learn that other countries have been doing it better, are models for us. That might happen in Scotland, but it ain't going to happen at Westminster, because the alienation there in relation to Europe is quite complete, and I'm quite worried that the Labour Party might want to dibble and dabble in this opportunism of Cameron to actually give us a kind of yes or no, or an out or in vote on the European Union. And the last thing this country needs is that vote.